I was in middle school, I really struggled with my identity, and I struggled with knowing who I was and really feeling like I belonged someplace. But was a part of church, grew up in church that whole time, and really in 1995 was a very significant moment for me in my life. In fact, I was in Orlando, Florida, and I came to a convention with my youth group, and there I believe God called me to full-time youth ministry. Now, I was a freshman at the time, so I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what I was getting into. And my youth pastor at the time, a few years later, challenged me, and actually, you know what, I actually have it. I don't always have this Bible, usually have a different one, but he wrote me this letter. This one? I keep 3 different things in here that he wrote me this letter. Let's see when he wrote it. 1998, March of 1998. He wrote me this letter, and he challenged me to consider what it was that happened 3 years prior. He had already left the church that I was attending and moved to Pittsburgh. So he wrote me that letter to challenge me to consider youth ministry. And in that letter, he just kind of encourages me and says that he saw something in me and that he believed God was calling me to consider youth ministry. And so I did. I prayed about it and pursued youth ministry. And I really believe at that time, in that season where I was praying over what it was that I was called to do, that God was calling me to do big-time youth ministry. And since then, I've been a visionary. I've been a big picture kind of guy, someone who likes to cast vision and somebody who likes to encourage people and work with teams and that kind of thing. But I'm a really big thinker, like a 30,000 feet thinker. I love to look out the airplane when you're flying and just see, it's amazing to realize how far you can see and how much you can see and the picture that you get from up there and that you don't get to see. And so I like to live life like that as well, that I just like to see the big picture and then encourage people and bring people along to, I'm not great, and I think this is part of my personality. I'm not great at the details. I'm not great at the small things, but I like to see the big picture and help people come together to do some of the small things. And I do the small things too, but that's not where I get excited and juiced up, so to speak. So I am a big picture kind of guy. When it came to youth ministry, that's where I was. I was like, God is calling me to big-time youth ministry. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't mean a youth group of like 300 people necessarily, but I really believed that God was calling me to big-time youth ministry. And I tell you that because of this. So I go to college, and I graduate from college, and I moved down to North Carolina, and I interned at a church of like 2,500 people, and the youth group was 300. And so I'm like, yeah, God, yeah, big-time youth ministry. I wasn't the youth pastor, but I was on the youth staff because the church was big enough to have a staff just for the youth group. And so I was on staff there, and this is like the answer to everything that God had told me. This is just the beginning, it's only going to get bigger because I'm a 30,000 feet kind of guy. And so I just, huge dreams and huge excitement, got all these visions and plans, and I believe God's going to do all this stuff. So I knew that I wasn't full-time at that time, so I knew that I was called to full-time youth ministry. So I found a position in Waynesboro, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, beautiful area, and I was there for 8 years serving in full-time youth ministry and began to see awesome things happen. And in my heart and in my mind, I was going to lay down roots there, and I was going to be committed to that location and just see big-time youth ministry happen in the Shenandoah Valley. And so I was just convinced. And so I just began doing it. I just started doing outreaches and began doing service projects and doing youth ministry as I saw youth ministry to be done. And I was successful. I was there for 8 years, which is in a youth pastor's life, that's eternity. The average stint of a youth pastor is 18 months. But I was there for 8 years and heavily involved in the community. And if I did an event, it was successful, and there were lots of kids that would come. We had 80, 90 kids in the youth ministry, and it was just great. Very successful in my eyes and in the eyes of the world. We were the largest church in the community as well. So I was like, yeah, see, I'm doing a good job. This is big-time youth ministry. So I am seeing everything happen that is supposed to happen, I think. This is another long story, But all of a sudden, it was about a year and a half ago, that got yanked out from under me. Didn't see it coming, had no idea, but all of a sudden, everything that I thought that I was doing was taken from me, and it was yanked out from under me. And I didn't know at that time what it was that I needed to learn, the things that I needed to realize and come to understand. But as that happened, I still believed that God was calling me to do big-time youth ministry, but suddenly I didn't know how. So for 4 months, I didn't have a job. We lived in a place where I was only there because of the job. We had great friends, but circumstances led me to not being able to be close to them anymore. So we knew we were going to move. So the only place we knew to move was to North Carolina, back to the Charlotte area where we had some connections. We didn't want to go back home. There wasn't really anything for me in my hometown. I certainly believed that if I went back there, I wouldn't find ministry there. And I wasn't going to go. My wife was from Cleveland. There's no way she was going to get me to go there. So it was either, yeah, I mean, yeah, he understands. So it was to Charlotte. And so we went back to Charlotte, and I served in a warehouse, or I worked in a warehouse for about 8 months, and it was a Christian family that owned the company, and it was a godsend. It was a miraculous thing, actually, that just to find employment. But really still feeling called to do youth ministry and to do ministry. And so I felt like I wasn't doing what it was that God had promised me all those years ago to do big-time youth ministry. Oh, I actually forgot one detail, a big one. So when I started in Virginia, we had a prophetic service, and I had Joshua 1 prophesied over me. And y'all know that's where Joshua was taking over for Moses. And basically, what I heard from that time of ministry was, be strong and courageous because I'm going to expand your territory. That's essentially the sort of what's happening in Joshua 1. But I'm hearing, be strong, be bold and courageous, and I will expand your territory. So I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to be bold, I'm going to be courageous, and God is going to expand my territory, right? And so it just expounded on that idea and dream that I had. So then here I am for a year. I'm like, well, God, what happened to my territory? What happened to expanding? What happened to all of this? I don't see how this is happening. This is fitting into that plan. So I was definitely in a desert season for a year, and thank God it was only a year. And I really believe that even that was a blessing. But now that it's over, I'm like, man, it was only a year. What a blessing that it was only a year. And so many people have I was expecting it to be much longer. And God just totally blessed me with this opportunity. So I've been in this role now since May. And this is a dream come true for me. This really is, not that I ever think that there's a promotion or anything kind of in ministry. I think that being a senior pastor would be a demotion. If God asked me to be a senior pastor, I'd be like, what did I do wrong? I'm sorry. I'll do it if you want me to, but I didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. So in youth ministry, I feel called to do youth ministry. And so this is a dream come true for me to be in this role, youth and children and young adults. And so as I came into this role, I began to process through what had gone on in my life and asking God, just give me a vision, give me an idea as to what it is that you're wanting to say to me, to this district, to the churches in our district, and to the next gen ministries. What is it that you want for us? And so he brought me back to Joshua. And just a very brief background and what's happening in Joshua 3. So Joshua's taken over from Moses, and they're camped at the Jordan. And on the other side of the Jordan represents the Promised Land. That is the Promised Land. We use it as a cliche, but it is literally the Promised Land that they were promised years and years and years ago, and they had to go through the desert, and they had to go through trials, and they had to go through all this stuff where they just didn't understand. We've been promised this land, we've been promised this experience, and now we're back in the desert, and they began to grumble and complain, and I believe it was because they needed to learn some lessons, and then they needed to learn them again, and then again, and then again, and then again. And God didn't do it because they needed it was their fault. God wanted to give them the promised land, but they weren't ready to receive it because they needed to understand some things before they got there. And so here they are at the Jordan, and they're prepared and they're ready to go in. I imagine they're pretty excited. There's a river, there's a barrier, but they can see it. It's the destination, the end is in sight. The promise of God's fulfilled promise is tangible, and it's there, and it's ready for them. And so here they are sitting camped at the Jordan in Joshua chapter 3. And let me start in verse, well here, this is I think in chapter 1. 3 days from now in chapter 1, you were going to, so he's just telling them, so they knew, the people knew, 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here and go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God has given you for your very own. So that was Joshua chapter 1. So Joshua 3, starting in verse 2. I think it's going to maybe be there. If not, it's fine. I'm going to read it to you. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. So I want to point out 3 things that I learned from this passage. And I believe that it applies to, like I said, I believe it applies to you as a congregation, as an individual, and I believe that it applies to us as a movement, and especially specifically in the Southeast District. And actually now that, so I got this word from the Lord when I began this role, but as I've been traveling the district, I'm more convinced that this is true more than ever. So I'm really passionate and excited about what God is doing, and so let's do it. So first of all, I'm called to follow him. The first thing that I learned from this passage was that I'm called to follow him. He says, when you see the Ark of the Covenant and the priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and you're to follow it. We're called to follow him. See, because we, and me, I was very capable in my own power to do the things that I wanted to do, and I would justify it and call it God. You know, I would say, you know what, I'm doing youth ministry. This is for God. This is for him. And so I was able to just go out and do things, but it turned out that so many times it was so easy for me to not follow him. And I was doing things that in the name of Jesus, and out of the right heart, out of the right mind, but I was able to do some of these things on my own power. At some point, I stopped following him and I got out ahead of him. And we are called to follow Jesus because he's going to take us places that we've never been before. So he wants to lead us and direct us. And if we're not careful, we'll get in front of him and we'll flip-flop the role. You know, like we won't give him control. We won't give him the steering wheel. We'll let him sit in the passenger seat maybe, but we won't give him the steering wheel. And I was doing that. I mean, if I wanted to have an event, I could throw an event together in a month and have 150 kids show up. You know, and I was able to do that because of the talent. You know, I was able to do that because of, you know, I just knew how to do it. I was a good youth pastor. You know, I had the abilities to do these things, but I was doing them without God. And I'm really concerned. I also hate what I'm about to say because I hate when other people do it too. But here in America, we are so capable. I hate blaming America, you know, for like it's their fault that we are like we are. But in the American church and American culture, we're so capable of accomplishing things on our own power. We don't always need God to do the things that we are trying to do. And I think sometimes it's for a couple of reasons. One, we're trying to do things that we want to accomplish, that we see, and we don't see God's from 30,000 feet. We don't see his vision. We see what we can see. And so many times we end up limiting ourselves to only what we can accomplish because we want to do it on our own, but rather than follow him. But if we were to follow him, what we see in Joshua 3 is that he's going to take us to places that we've never been. We have to follow him because we've never been there before. And so if we're going to see God do things that only he can do, then only he can do it. And we can only get there by following him. second thing that I learned is that I must dedicate myself to his story. See, I think, and tied back to following him, I think that the principle of belief is something that we've lost the concept of what it is to really believe. We've taken belief and just made it a head thing. We've just made it something that we have knowledge of. And so I believe that chair will hold me up because it's a chair. And I know in my head that it's supposed to hold me up. I believe that it will do that. But when we look at Scripture, belief isn't just something that you have in your head. Belief is something that you're completely dedicated to, and you totally, and so you don't just know it in your head, you show it and you live it with your life. So when I believe that chair will hold me up, if I really believe it, I'm willing to test my faith. I'm willing to sit in it and to dedicate myself to the fact that this is a chair, and I know not just in principle that it will hold me, I believe with my life and with my actions it will hold me. And so I think about dedicating myself to his story. I think about a couple of things. Have you ever seen the movie, it just way out of my head.
Lord of the Rings.
No.
Star Trek.
Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams.
Oh, yes.
The movie Field of Dreams. Parenthetically, I've actually been there to this field in Iowa. My brother used to live in Iowa, and we stopped by this field. Ironically, the field, I'm going to tell you about the movie, but the field is built on two separate properties. Like, it's almost split in half by two owners, and they hate each other. So this movie that's about bringing unity and bringing people together is the actual real place divides people, and they charge two separate admission prices, and the field looks different on one side than it does on the other, and the cornfields and the outfield are very different. Like, they hate each other. It's really funny, actually. Sad, but funny. So the movie. The beginning of the movie, Kevin Costner, his character, it's not actually Kevin Costner, it is him, but he's walking through a cornfield in Iowa, and he hears this audible voice. If you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. And so he's crazy, right? He's hearing an audible voice in the middle of Iowa. He's probably too lonely and has no friends because he's in the middle of nowhere in Iowa. And so the beginning of the movie, he's just really wrestling with this idea. Is he insane? Is he crazy? Because he knows he's hearing this voice, but it can't make any sense because it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. That can't be happening. And then he learns what it is that he's supposed to do, and it doesn't get any better. Like, okay, this crazy voice that I'm hearing is asking me to build a baseball field, and if I do it, something will happen. You know, and so it just got crazier and crazier and crazier. So then he does. He just builds a baseball field in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa. And that's stupid. But, you know, if you haven't seen the movie, I hate to spoil it for you, but in the end, there's a purpose behind it. And people, ghosts, you know, because whatever, they start, I believe, though, I'm not going to tell you what happens at the end, but it had a really good point and a great purpose. And he just was dedicated to this, doing something stupid. I believe that the guy who wrote that movie must have been reading the Bible when he came up with that idea. Because you look at the story of Noah. Noah heard an audible voice. If you build it, you will live. You know? That's stupid. You build a boat? No, it hasn't rained. What's that? Flood? Why? What would it flood? You know, the water's just there in the ground, and it's not going to kill everybody. Like, how could that kill anybody? That doesn't make any sense. He was so dedicated to doing something that was so ridiculous. Like that's stupid in and of itself to think that, you know, that doesn't make any sense. But he was convinced that he heard from the Lord that you're to do this ridiculous thing. He was so dedicated to that he gave 120 years to building this boat. You know, at some point in there, you'd have been like, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. Is there a point to this? Now, I can't tell you how many times in ministry that I feel like that. And then, man, is there a point? Am I doing anything? Why am I doing this? Is there a point to this? But I know that I have heard God. And I can't tell you how many times and over just that 1 year period that I was like, you know, is there a point? I could go get a job and actually make money for a change. You know, there's got to be something else I could do. And maybe I'm supposed to just do that. Maybe, and so I began to doubt and question, well, maybe this isn't really supposed to happen. Maybe I'm not really supposed to give my life to this. But I was convinced, and I know, and I believe that God called me to do it. And so he showed with my life. And so Noah did it for 120 years. That's commitment. That's dedication. You want to talk about somebody being all in. Noah was all in. So in Joshua 3, Joshua tells the people, we need to consecrate yourselves. Basically what he's saying is you need to dedicate yourselves to this. You need to be all in on this. You need to show with your lives, you need to show with everything that you have in you that you are committed to this. And here's why. Because the Lord is going to do amazing things among you. That's what he says. He says, if you dedicate yourselves to this, the Lord is going to do amazing things among you. I believe that God is going to do amazing things among us. God is going to do amazing things in me. He's going to do amazing things in you. He's going to do amazing things in this church, in this district, in the world, in the lives of Next Gen Ministries. I believe he's going to do amazing things. But if that's going to happen, we're going to have to be completely dedicated. We're going to have to be all in. We're going to have to dedicate ourselves to that. And I believe that he's going to do amazing things. I believe that God, look, I am biased and I have a specific angle because I am the Next Gen director. But I really believe that God is going to do something amazing, especially as I've traveled the district and really the East Coast and much of America that I've gotten to experience and feel. I believe there's something special about what is happening in Florida right now. And I'm not just talking about Foursquare. I believe that in general. I believe that the harvest is really, truly ready in the state of Florida right now. And I believe that the light and the darkness are going to contrast more than ever. And people are starving and they are desperate for the light. And all we need to do is go out and be the light. And people will flock to it because they're starving, because the darkness is depressing. And God wants to do amazing things. And here's what I don't understand. You want to talk about crazy things. You know, Moses, when he was at the burning bush, he was asked to pick up the snake, the rod. You know, he had all these excuses why he couldn't go and talk to Pharaoh and have his people released and all that. I'd have been with God up to that point. I'd been like, okay, God, yeah, I can speak to Pharaoh. I don't mind. I was talking for him about 1,000 people if you want me to. I can do that. No problem. But then when he had him throw the rod on the ground and it turned into a snake, he'd have lost me right there. I'd have been like, oh, nope, you're going to have to find somebody else now. That's a snake. And he says to pick it up. No, that's crazy. That's insane. It's a snake. I'm perfectly fine right now. If I touch it, I might die. I hate snakes. So, no, that's insane. But he just does because he's obedient. And so he bends down and he picks it up. Turns back into a rod. Asked to do crazy things, ridiculous things. You want to talk about crazy? Why does God need to use me to see this kingdom come? To see what is happening in heaven happen here on earth? Why does he have to use me? What's crazy about that is that I get to. He doesn't need me. He's asking me to partner with him because he wants to do amazing things and I get to be a part of that. That's a blessing. That is something that I don't deserve. And I have found myself in positions and places doing things that I didn't deserve, I didn't earn, that I'm not capable of doing. There are better people than me. And yet, here I am. I get to be a part of what God is doing in this world. You get to be a part of what God is doing. And he wants to do amazing things. And if you dedicate yourselves to that, to the fact that this is his story, it's all about him, and show it with our lives. We are called to obey. If we show with our obedience and show with our lives and are dedicated to the story, he's going to do amazing things among us. And finally, those amazing things that are going to happen are things that only God can do. I tried so hard all my life to do things and to accomplish things, and I was doing them and I was seeing them happen, but they were only things that I can do. And I alluded to this earlier, and kind of jumped the gun. But we so often settle for things that only we can accomplish. And we're happy with that because I set goals and I can set my goals and I can achieve my goals. And so when I achieve them, it gives me a sense of satisfaction, right? Right? I'm a checklist kind of guy too. I like to, in fact, if I do something in a day and I didn't have it on my checklist, I'll write it on the checklist so I can check it off. Because I accomplished something, and I wanted to acknowledge to myself, good job, Matt, you finished something. It wasn't what you were going to do today, but you did it, so you better write it down so that you can feel like you accomplished something. There's that sense of satisfaction when you achieve a goal. And so we're like that. So sometimes we set goals to do things that only we can accomplish because we want to be able to accomplish them. But God wants to see things happen that we don't even understand. The Bible says that he wants to do things in us that we could, greater things than we could ever ask or imagine. And I believe that he's going to do things that are greater than we could ever ask or imagine, and he wants to do them here. God has a God-sized dream for you and me. We need to make room for him to do it. Joshua, I don't know exactly what it's in verse 9, I think it's in chapter 3 still. It says, Joshua says to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Levites." And then he says, "See the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot on the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." So, and then it's a long passage. I'm just going to tell you this just for the sake of time. He tells them to choose 12 people, and each of them to pick up a rock from the middle of the Jordan and bring that out with them. And so what's happening is the priests who were carrying the covenant, the Ark of the Covenant, as soon as they put their feet step into the water is going to stop. Now, it wasn't like the Red Sea. The Red Sea parted, and it was not flowing, so it parted on both sides, and there were huge walls. But the Jordan, when they stepped into the Jordan, the water just stopped. It stopped coming downstream. And so it carried away, and then there was a wall on one side. I believe that it's pretty impressive that that's how they entered the Promised Land, when it's also how they entered the wilderness. That's when they crossed the Red Sea. So I believe that even though these people were a new generation, because that was part of the punishment and part of they had to be in the desert for 40 more years, this is a new generation. I believe that they knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that what God said was, this time when they're called, when they're at the Red Sea, they were grumbling and complaining, "Why did you lead us into here only to die? That this is ridiculous. God, why have you done this to us?" And then he surprises them and opens the door for them. But this time, I believe that they were sitting at the Jordan, and they were told, "You're going to cross the Jordan on dry land." And they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. Of course we can do that. You did that before. Yeah, let's just do it again," right? And so this time, I'm sure with confidence, they stepped out. With boldness, they stepped into the Jordan River, knowing that it was going to stop. Why wouldn't it stop? And this is God. He can do this. And so when they get into the Jordan, 12 men were to pick up rocks from the Jordan and take it to the other side, and they make a monument to remember what happened in the Jordan. And God brought you into the Promised Land. There was no doubt that what happened was God. I promise you, none of those millions of people took credit for what happened in the Jordan. There was no question that it was God. So many times, our dreams and our goals are just Matt-sized. My goals are just Matt-sized dreams. And I'm a 30,000 feet kind of guy, and I'm still setting goals because I want to know that I can accomplish them. It doesn't take much faith in God to accomplish my goals, because I can achieve them without Him. But God wants to do something that's bigger, God-sized dreams, things that only He can do. And when you're seeing them happen, you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's Him. So He asks them to take up 12 stones and to make a monument, because when you get to the other side, it's going to be a place where you're going to be able to say, that was God and only God. There's no doubt that in anybody's mind that God had done that. And so what? I like to ask the question at the end of every kind of message that I'm sharing. So what does that mean for us? What do I do about that? How do I process that? Here's what I believe. I believe that you're probably in one of a few areas. Maybe you're in the wilderness. Maybe you're in the desert place. Maybe you experience a time where you have begun to doubt And maybe there's a tragedy going on in your life, and I don't know. I just met you all this morning, so I don't know where you are. But maybe you're in the desert, and you're just, God, where are you? What happened to that dream? What happened to that promise? What's going on? Remember that this is His story, if that's where you are. At this point, the most important thing that you can do is truly believe that God has promised you what He has promised you. It's easy whenever you're in the desert to say, you know what, this is worthless, doesn't make any sense, I can go on my own way, I never have to bring God back into this. But it's in that moment where it's the most important that you truly believe. And believing shows obedience, and you're going to have to demonstrate it with your actions that you truly believe. It's not just about knowing in your head that He's promised you these things. What are you doing about it with your life, with your actions? Are you demonstrating that you really believe? Or are you just taking a position like I did and had to learn and overcome of a defensive position where I'm a victim and God's done this to me or somebody's done this to me, or are you going to demonstrate with your faith and your confidence and your boldness that God is who He says He is? This is His kingdom. It's all about Him. And I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to pick myself up and I'm going to pursue Him and I'm going to follow Him to get out of this mess. So maybe you're in the desert. Or maybe you're at the banks of the Jordan. Maybe you're sitting there right on the precipice of what it is that He has for you. Maybe you didn't even know that you've been sitting there for a while. Maybe you're right on the edge of seeing God's promise come to fruition, and it's right there, tangible, but there's a barrier between you and it. And maybe you don't even know what the barrier is. Maybe you're not aware. But if you feel like you're at that point where the promise is right there and I can just reach it, if just this would happen, if just whatever, and you fill in the blank, if it was just gone, this barrier, if I could just overcome this one thing, maybe that's where you are. For you, it's time to make a decision. Are you all in? Are you going to dedicate yourself to His plan, to His story? Are you going to get up and follow behind Him and trust that as you do, He's going to part and He's going to stop the waters so that you can walk through on dry land? And maybe it's just a matter of you making that decision. I am all in, and I'm going to do it. I'm just going to step out in faith. Maybe you're on dry land in the middle of the river, and you're in the middle of something that man, you know this is what's going on in your life right now. There's no way on earth this is anything you could have done. Maybe you are experiencing the answer of a miracle right now. And here's what I say to you. Pick up some stones. Because when you get through this miracle, when you get through this time, and it might be a very brief moment in your life, or when you come to another one of those times in your life where God is doing something that only He can do, pick up some stones. Take something with you so that you can remember, so that you can point back and remind people and tell people, man, only God could do that. Look what He did. Or maybe you crossed into the other side finally. And maybe you are in the promised land. And sometimes as Christians, we're ashamed to say that sometimes. We're afraid because we don't want to feel like we're bragging or whatever, or I don't even know what. There's a lot of different reasons why we would be ashamed even in a way to admit that we're in a promised land. Things are going pretty well right now. But I'm seeing the promise of God be fulfilled and the things. And look, of course that's God's goal. So there should be people in that season. And for you, I say, first of all, keep your head on a swivel. Because when the Israelites entered the promised land, the enemy was there and wanted to take it back from them. And so stay on guard. Don't begin to relax and sit down and to just let the enemy come after you, because he wants to kill, steal, and destroy and to take that back from you. But then also, there are people who are in the desert that need to know how He got you through the Jordan. They need to know how God has brought you through this. And they need you. They need to hear your stories because they need the courage. They need the faith. They need something. They need encouragement to be able to step up and to follow and to cross the Jordan. So people need you. He didn't bring you into the promised land just so you could sit back and enjoy and put your feet up and sip iced tea. Right? Like, He brought you there for a reason, because this is His story. This is His kingdom. It's all about Him. So as I think about Next Gen Ministries, let me let me just wrap it up with this. I believe that God is about to do something incredible. I don't want you, I don't want me, I don't want anybody, any churches at all to miss what it is that God is doing. I would love for everybody to be a part of it. And I don't believe that God would do anything big in Foursquare and in Florida even. That he would do something revival-like, that he would do something miraculous and huge. I don't believe that he would do any of those things without the next gen, children and youth, being at the heart of it. And so, my challenge to you as a church, as families, as individuals, is to pursue and to dig deep, be committed, be all in next gen ministries, children and youth. What is it that you're doing to help raise up and to help develop people? What is it that you're doing that is calling those young people into the kingdom to help serve and love? Because God's doing something big, and I don't want us to be able to miss out. That's just sort of a parenthetical thought and point. But I really believe that God's going to do something. The spirit here is unlike in all the other states that I visit and we're part of. There's something special happening in Florida. And there's something special happening with our little family of churches even. That God, and a part of that is camp, but a big part of it is just the culture that teenagers are living in and that children are living in. They're desperate to belong someplace. Just like I was desperate to belong someplace. And God is that place. And we are a light. And they will flock to that because there's a place where they can be loved and accepted. And so, this, what do you call this little region of St. Pete? I mean, right, this community. Yes. I believe that you are located in this Azalea neighborhood because God has a purpose for that. God has a plan for this community, for this church, and he wants to use you to reach it. And I kind of wouldn't even dare begin to tell you how to do it. Wouldn't even dare to do that. But what is it that God is calling you to do? What is it that step is he asking you to take? And I believe that children and youth, I just believe that they are a huge part of that. So let me pray and